In such a big and sparsely populated country as Argentina, air travel is an essential way to get around. But the national carrier, Aerolineas Argentinas, has been hit by a wave of strikes over pay, leaving thousands of travellers stranded. And the government doesn't appear to be open to a negotiated solution. Over the last few weeks, air travel in Argentina has been hit by a wave of strikes over pay. Pilots, cabin crew, baggage handlers and other ground staff have been disrupting air travel with a series of one-day strikes at airports across the country. This has led to the cancellation of hundreds of flights and travel disruption for tens of thousands of passengers, mostly on national and regional routes, but also some flights to Europe and the USA. The strikers are all state employees, either airport workers or employees of the state-owned airline Aerolineas Argentinas. However, the disruption to travel has also affected other airlines travelling into Argentina, which have had to divert to alternative airports or even cancel some flights. The strikes are basically over pay. Like all state-employed workers, salaries haven't kept up with inflation, which effectively means a drop in the real value of earnings. Rather than sitting down to talks and negotiations with union leaders, the government is taking a hard-line approach. Aerolíneas Argentinas are trying to go through the courts to bill the unions for the loss of $2 million in revenue. This is reflective of the anti-picketing policy enacted earlier this year to stop demonstrations on the streets, causing disruption for workers in the city by billing unions for any damage. In addition, the government has declared air travel an essential service and says that strikers must guarantee a minimum operation of 50% of flights, and that locations that are only served by one route need to have that service maintained. Not an unreasonable demand, but unions say it threatens their right to strike. Milei's government has little patience with these kinds of distractions and would rather see such state-owned enterprises off their hands completely. Privatization is the sword of Damocles that continues to hang over Aerolíneas Argentinas. Back at the start of his presidency, Milei announced the infamous mega decree and omnibus bill, which contained, among many other things, articles to prepare the country for a wave of privatizations. One of the companies at the top of the list was Aerolíneas Argentinas, the national airline. During the negotiations to get the omnibus bill through Congress, a number of companies were removed from the privatization list, including Aerolíneas. However, the disruption being caused by ongoing strikes has put the possibility of privatization back on the table, with the Pro Party, an ally of Milei's La Libertad Avanza in the Congress, putting forward a motion to privatize the airline. Aerolíneas has a long and checkered history of public and private ownership. Back in 1990, it was privatized by President Carlos Menem, but was renationalized in 2008 under President Cristina Kirchner. The company is said to be riddled with corruption and currently loses as much as $200 million per year. The government says that it's wrong that ordinary taxpayers subsidize the expensive air travel of an elite few citizens and foreign tourists. President Milei's government has already begun to deregulate air travel in Argentina with an open skies policy to allow more competition by letting in low-cost airlines such as Flybondi and JetSmart. Whilst I'm not against privatization per se, I think it shouldn't be pursued as a blind ideology. Some industries might actually be more appropriate in state hands, and a more pragmatic approach is probably better, looking at companies on a case-by-case basis. Looking at the successes and failures in other countries might be a good starting point. Something like an airline would at first glance seem to be an obvious candidate for the private sector, but perhaps there are other factors to consider. Argentina is a really big country, with a low population density outside of the big cities. A large part of the interior is very flat, covered by huge farms and scattered with small towns and villages. The flatness of the countryside can make it feel like being on the open ocean, and it's perfect for railways. For most of the 20th century, Argentina was covered in a complex network of railroads, principally to bring agricultural produce to the capital and the ports, but also facilitating passenger travel and providing a lifeline to many of the scattered small towns. The railways were privatised in the 1990s under Carlos Menem and have since withered away to almost nothing, leaving behind ghost stations for tourist photo opportunities and isolated dying towns. A handful of historic lines still run as tourist attractions in Patagonia and in the far north of the country, and in recent years there's been some reconstruction of important lines, such as Buenos Aires to La Plata and to Mar del Plata. Not all the old routes may have been economical to run, but there was a public service consideration for small communities, and a strong argument for subsidised or some kind of nationalised railway routes to maintain connections. Considering the size of Argentina and the relative isolation of some of the poorer provinces, a similar argument could be made when it comes to air travel. There are routes currently run by Aerolineas Argentinas which run at a loss and have little possibility of ever making a profit, but do provide essential connections to isolated parts of the country. Privatization needs to take these routes into account and not let the connections go the way of the railroads, or build more railroads, which might not be such a bad idea. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please give it a like. And if you want to see more content like this, there's a couple of videos on the screen now. If you're not already subscribed, you might want to do that too. If you want to support the channel, you can buy me a coffee in the link below. And until next time, que tengas un buen día.